Welcome everyone to the Ask an Architect show. Here we are, episode 20, here with Constance Lai. Constance, thanks so much for joining me on the show.
Anytime.
Glad to have you here. I want to get right into it with you, Constance. I want to talk about historic preservation, because that's kind of your focus, right? Your specialty. Tell me, why is that your specialty? What about historic preservation is attractive to you? Why is it not boring? What's in it for you?
Well, I actually fell into historic preservation during the recession in 2002.
Oh, okay.
I picked up and moved from Boston to San Francisco and landed at a historic preservation position just in the city there. And I only thought that I'd only do it for like a couple of years and kind of go back into new construction.
That was 15 years ago.
Yeah, and I've been doing it ever since, basically.
So you like it. So you love it at this point.
I do.
So what about it? What, even though you just fell into it, over the years, what have you realized, how have you realized it's your passion?
Well, there are just so many reasons why I love historic preservation. I love old buildings, and like going to school, a lot of us we learn about the old buildings in history, but they're not really they're not living to us. They're kind of like things in our history textbooks. Mm-hmm. But then just being in old buildings and being around them and being in them, and just looking at the craft of the craftspeople who built these buildings 100 years ago, and seeing that they could build buildings so much better than we can today, and then learning about the history of the buildings and the things that happened in those buildings. Is just really an incredible, fascinating process that I don't think you get with new buildings.
Sure. Yeah.
So
fair enough. So as you're studying historic preservation, so you kind of fell into it and it becomes, a passion, you realize it's your career. Mm-hmm. And as you're trying to get better and improve and constantly, do better at your craft, what do you use to inform your practice of historic preservation? Are there books that you read? Are there podcasts? Is there something out in society that really inspires you? What informs your work?
Well, the historic preservation community actually is really quite broad.
Okay.
There are architects like myself. There are contractors. I also work for a general contractor.
Sure. Yep.
Who specialize in old buildings. There are conservators. Mm-hmm. So conservators are more like material specialists, and they will fix everything from a brick to a painting for you or a mural. And then there are the policy people in the historic preservation community, and those are the people who are like trying to get money from Congress to like rebuild their main street. So
multifaceted.
Yeah.
So many things going on.
And each one of these groups has an annual conference.
Okay.
So
do you go to them all? Are you in conferences every month?
If I went to them all, I probably wouldn't even be working. There are really that many.
Cool.
So you have to pick and choose, and I pick and choose every year which conference I'd like to go to.
Interesting. And in your specialty, so historic preservation is obviously very broad. Is there a particular building type or niche that you've been most involved with over the last 5 to 10 years?
Well, for the past 10 years plus, I've been in DC, and so I kind of joke that all of my buildings are just on the mall.
Sure.
And I just
that's not a bad place to have your have all your projects.
Right. I can actually say that at one point in time I had 5 parking spots on the mall.
Wow. Okay.
So pretty much all the ranges of types of buildings on the mall.
And DC, you would say, is a good place for historic preservation. If people are out there thinking, okay, this is my interest, this is my passion, where do I go? Is DC a good place to come?
Yes, there's DC, Boston, New York, San Francisco, and even LA.
So really anywhere with a long history of good building tradition.
Yes, I forgot to mention Chicago, of course.
And Chicago. Okay, so you mentioned that you're at a construction company now. Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit different than most architects. Most architects are in your tried and true traditional practice. So you're at Grunley Construction, correct? Yes. So how did you get into that? What made you say, yeah, that's something I'm going to try? And then why has it been great?
Well, actually, it started here in DC, and I also fell into it. So I was at the Eisenhower Executive Office Building project, and that was a design build. So the government decided that instead of hiring the architect and the architect as the designer and the contractor separately under 2 separate contracts, they decided to go design build, which meant that the prime contract was held with the contractor, and the architect was underneath the prime contractor.
Right, so different relationship there in terms of
and so at
roles.
that moment in time, I was the historic preservation specialist on the design side.
Okay.
And then they kind of noticed that I was bossing around their subcontractors, and so they said maybe it would be a better thing for you to actually be on the contracting side.
Okay, cool. Tell me more about that.
So just architects in general are generalists, and general contractors are generalists too.
Okay.
So architects look at the big picture, put together a full set of documents that incorporate all of the trades. And the general contractor is the person who has to execute that set of documents. So they themselves are also generalists.
So you have two generalists here running the project.
Right. And so it's actually a very natural fit to move from an architecture company to a general contracting company when you're that person who's putting all the pieces together. But instead of putting them all together on paper, I'm putting them all together on a job site.
Cool. And do you find that more rewarding than you did in architecture?
I do. I know that in architecture school, we're always kind of taught to have like this architecture ego, but for me, it's just so much more satisfying seeing things built and saying, hey, I built that. Like, I could really care less if I said I designed that or not, because really you don't want me designing.
Interesting. That's a great point, because I think when people start out in their early stages wanting to be an architect, they look around and they say, well, at the end of my career, it would be really cool to look and see the buildings that I've designed. But you're saying you get that same, almost more satisfaction in that respect being on the contractor side, because you've actually had a hand in the building.
Right.
Interesting. I think that's a very thoughtful point to bring out to our audience. So now you've been there quite some time, and you're by no means near the end of your career. So what's next? Where do you take your career from here? Do you just keep on perfecting your craft? Do you have a long-term goal? Do you want to run the construction company? What's the goal for someone in your position?
Right now, I'm the manager of historic preservation services, and I help all of the different departments in my company. Okay. So everything from estimating, actually all the way from the beginning, from marketing, I help land jobs, I help estimate jobs, I help buy jobs out, and I help execute jobs in the operations department. So right now, my focus is really kind of broad, but I only help with the historic preservation aspects in each one of these departments.
Gotcha.
So I'm not sure if I'm ever going to specialize in one of these departments, because where I'm at, I can see a project from the very beginning all the way to the end.
Very
and
cool.
For me, it's just amazing.
So you're shepherding that project along through all the stages, and I can imagine that's extremely rewarding. I mean, that's what architects want to do, is see projects from the beginning to completion.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
So I don't know if I'm ever going to get bored in my current position, because it's always new projects every day.
What I keep hearing from you that I want to kind of point out to our audience is that, at first blush, historic preservation can seem like something that is based in the traditional, is something that works, just with old buildings, and that's all it is. And what I think you're bringing out of this conversation is a lot of color, a lot of excitement, a lot of opportunity to get your hands dirty in a lot of different things. And like, I know from our audience, they come out of school and they want to get involved really quickly in all different aspects, and you don't get that chance sometimes when you're a new graduate. So historic preservation sounds like a great opportunity.
I mean, it just depends on the project, and it depends on the person too. I mean, there are some people who really like to focus on one thing, and then there are other people who are broad, who like to look at the broader picture. So, yeah, I mean, it just depends on the person. But I wanted to touch on something that you said.
Please do.
In terms of just technology, because a lot of people think that historic preservation is all about bringing back the old craft, the old technology. But in fact, we use a lot of new technologies. So in my current on my current project, we don't have enough stone carvers, and so we're actually using a CNC machine, this huge robot, and that robot is pumping out, carving all of these really ornamental marble corbels and rosettes. And so that's just something that is part of our industry that people don't really know about, is that we use laser technology. We're laser cleaning marble. We're using robots. We're using like 3D printing to print out like models that will then be cast in bronze. So we do it all.
I mean, that sounds like the ideal scenario for our students, because a lot of our folks, you know, they love the craft of architecture, but they love the technology and, you know, the futurism that brings to the table. And to be able to blend those sounds like the best of both worlds. Sounds really cool.
Yeah, and the thing is that, like, where you think of all those 3D scanning, 3D technologies, and you think of all the forms that you're seeing in all the architectural magazines, but we're taking those same technologies and creating figural, like, sculptures and forms, which I would have to argue is a lot more difficult to do than just doing a wave and a curve here and there. So
sure, and you know, there's in historic preservation, it's not just about the preservation; it's about the art of it and bringing back the art or enhancing the art that already exists. So I think people think that the creative lies only in the new, when actually you could probably be really creative in historic preservation.
Yeah, I mean, all the artisans back before, every single acanthus leaf that is carved is different. You're not getting the same acanthus leaf because each carver was different. And so now we have, with this new technology, we do have the option to create the exact same acanthus leaf every single time. And we're kind of like in this conundrum of, maybe we should just tell the computer to tweak this one a little bit different so it looks like it's hand
to add some richness and robustness to it, and creativity at the same time, and really enjoys the art of juggling projects and all the different pieces and parts, then this profession is something that would probably be really interesting or really rewarding.
Yes, I mean, it's like you think of a BIM model for a new construction, and that you think, oh, you can get everything in exactly where you want it, and you can use the BIM model to figure out where all of your infrastructure runs are going to be. But okay, that's seems simple enough, right? But then you add this layer of an old building, and you don't know what the structure is. You don't know who's gone in there and hacked the floor, you know, 20 years ago, because it could have been Secret Service. Like, you don't know who it was. You don't know what you're gonna find. And so, like, every day there's a new discovery, and like, so it's just being part of that adrenaline rush is really fun.
So historic preservation and adrenaline rush just used in the same paragraph. So check it out.
Is.
All right, so take me to the next project, the Washington Monument earthquake repairs. Tell me, Constance, is it going to fall down, and is it okay for me to take my kids there?
It will not fall down.
Excellent. Good to know.
You can take your kids there. I would definitely encourage you to take your kids there.
So what was the project all about? What repairs were happening?
So in 2011, after the earthquake, the Washington Monument had to shut down because there was a lot of damage. There was a video on TV. I don't know if you saw the camera.
I don't think so. Yeah.
So there's a camera up at the top of the monument where all the tourists go. And you could, in that video, you could see tourists basically being rained on by little pieces of marble. And luckily nobody got hurt, but that whole entire structure at the top of the monument is basically dry laid stone. So there were no structural connections. It was all being held by gravity, one stone on top of another stone by another stone, with the very top stone being the keystone. It's like a three-dimensional like archway.
So it was
with
holding
a
itself
keystone.
together.
Yes.
Okay.
And so when the earthquake happened, that all shook.
Okay.
And so the designers actually decided to put in structural connections. So when you you can't go up it right now because it's closed again. But when it reopens,
we're good to go.
Yes. And when you go up, you can look at those structural connections. They're all stainless steel, and they're basically these huge bolts that go into the marble. So
if you're looking to see some actual building technology in effect and in action, check out the top of the Washington Monument.
Yes.
It's a great example of a project. All right, last project I want to touch on, the U.S. Capitol.
Yes.
What's going on over there?
So there are a lot of different projects there. The architect of the Capitol has just so many projects it's hard to keep track of.
Sure.
So the dome was just restored. And so that was another general contractor who did that project. And then right now we're just doing the Senate marble. So everything, let's see if you can see it. So it's everything like right here.
That section, obviously.
So basically the area around the Senate.
Cool.
And so the marble around the whole entire U.S. Capitol is it's in good shape, but there's some aspects of it that just need a little bit fixing up. So
would you say material science is an important subject if you're interested in this type of profession?
Yes,
Okay.
definitely. It's not a background that I had personally, so I had to learn it on the job, but
Sure.
if you're interested in historic preservation, I would definitely encourage that, so you don't
Yep.
have to kind of like study
Yep.
at night.
Seems obvious from talking to you.
Yes.
All right, let's just to wrap it up, Constance. Again, we have an audience of folks who are approaching graduation, looking at the profession, trying to figure out what to do. If somebody has an interest in historic preservation, what advice would you give them in terms of their first job potentially, or how to approach the profession, or what they should be thinking about right now?
Well, from a very practical standpoint, there is a website called PreserveNet, and it's put out by Columbia University, and that would be the first place to look for internships.
Okay.
And then there are just so many resources that you could go to. The National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Association for Preservation Technology, the American Institute for Conservation of Artistic and Historic Artifacts. I think
Tim, let's get all those linked up. Make sure you rewatch this episode.
So
use the resources that are out there right now.
yes,
There's lots out there.
Yes, and AIA has a historic resources committee, so.
Fantastic. And we want to thank the AIA. They're the sponsors of the Ask an Architect show. So thank you, AIA, for all your support. Constance, thank you for your time again. It was a pleasure talking to you today. And we'll see you next time on the Ask an Architect show.